Have you heard about this personal and professional podcast?
Coaching in Session
with your host, Michael Rearden.
Welcome, Dale Kershner, to Coaching in Session. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How about you?
Doing well. Thanks so much for coming on. Today, we're going to be talking about your professional coaching work. And I know that can be vague for individuals, but we're going to be explaining all the work you have done. You have so many years of experience, knowledge, and wisdom that hopefully we can be imparting in the audience today. In your own words, can you tell the world who you are, what you do, and how you help?
For the last 43 years, I've been working with businesses and individuals to provide the breadth of experience that I've accumulated, but also provide from within them the things that most directly motivate them, inspire them, give them access to actions to move forward so that they can achieve their highest potential, their peak level of performance.
One of the things I wanted to ask you is going to be dynamic, because with age comes a different type of maturity. For example, I'm going to speak to a 16-year-old very different than I am going to speak to a 35-year-old because of ego, because of world experience, whatever you want to call it.
Certainly.
What would be something you would say to your younger self, maybe in your teenage years, right before you're leaving the teenage years and getting into adulthood? What would be something that would inspire you at that age to reach your higher potential?
I think at that age, the thing that would have made the greatest difference for me would have been an understanding of patience. It's all going to work out. I was in a dead panic to make sure that I was going to save the world from itself and, inspire nations and all of that. And I haven't done that. And I've certainly done enough. And there's more for me to do. There's always more for all of us to do. But I didn't have to take it on like it was my individual job to fix everything that was broken on the planet. So if I could reach back and shake 16-year-old me, it would be to let me know that, look, it's going to work out. You're going to be fine. So is the world, by the way, and there's nothing in need of saving. And there's definitely things to offer and guide and provide for. But, I don't have to lose my mind to get there.
Are you familiar with The Hero's Journey?
I am.
It's a book. During the hero's journey, it's almost like the hero is destined to their destiny. Is like they have to do this or they have to do that, and they have to please people. And, as we grow up, we lose so many friends that we thought would be friends forever. We become more certain in our actions. So we're not doing things that don't benefit us. And it's something that I think age is the wisdom to, where it's like you can be around like a rough group of individuals when you're a teenager, and your parents or your grandparents or your mentors, whoever's going to say something to you, and they're going to say, listen, this person that you're around, like they're just kind of on the wrong path. The hero's journey instead would say, well, I got to save them, right? I have to do something so they can get on the right path. Do you think it's someone's responsibility, especially when they're so young, to care or to even make it their mission to say, hey, I'm trying to help everyone?
There's a complex question.
Dive in.
Or I'm going to make it so. How's that? I think we are all here in service of others, cut and dry. I think it's so much less about us and what we're here to accomplish, or how much we accumulate, or any of those kinds of things, even our relationships and so forth. And that we came to inhabit this spot on this planet so that we can make a difference for everyone else. So from that standpoint, is it my job to chart somebody else's path or save somebody from themselves? It's not. It is my job to look outside of myself, which I always haven't been good at. But it is for me to provide everything I can to everyone I can provide it to to give them access to whatever they're interested in finding access to. I learned, and not that long ago, maybe only, 15, 20 years ago, that it's not my job to plan the life path for another person or even be responsible for the life path of another person. And I think that's an easy hole to fall into as a coach, because people come to you and they're asking for these kinds of things. And one needs to be careful. One needs to stop and go, no. You designed your path. You selected a certain karma to pursue. My job is to help move the blockades out of the way and maybe give you some tools, some wisdom, some inspiration to get there. But it's not my responsibility that you succeed or fail in whatever path that you've chosen for yourself. And there was a huge amount of freedom for me when I came to that, when I discovered that. So much pressure off of me that I didn't have to save everyone I spoke to.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. When it comes to a person's path, though, right, there's going to be obstacles, challenges along the way.
Of course.
Where would you say is the most common setback or the most common obstacle a person would face? And we don't have to make it an age, because I believe an obstacle can happen at any age. It can happen when you're 12 years old and maybe you lose a parent, and then that trauma becomes an anchor for you and you feel like there's no one in the world that cares about you anymore or something like that. So that could be an obstacle. You have to get through it. What would be the most common obstacle you see in your coaching work, and how you help people navigate through those?
I think the most common obstacle is the warm and fuzzy comfort people feel in the creations that they've invented in their own dysfunction. Everybody comes to me with something they want to change, something they want to evolve from, bad habits that they want to break, those kinds of things. I use the Michelangelo example, where someone asked Michelangelo when he had this, the statue of David, and they asked him, so how could you possibly see David in that block of stone? And he said, oh, no, David was always there. I just took everything away that wasn't David. So I think the single greatest obstacle to overcome with any human being is moving themselves out of their way for what they want to accomplish. And if I succeed at that, then they can do anything.
Very good point. Oftentimes, many people are going to be the limiting factors in their life. Of course, there's going to be teachers. Of course, there's going to be parents. There's going to be friends and peers that are going to be the naysayers in your life. But they don't necessarily have the power that you do as an individual, because you get to say. So if someone says no to you, you get to say yes to yourself.
That's right.
You get to say, I'm going to do it regardless of what other people are thinking and what other people are doing. But then it becomes difficult when you don't have the support. Did you have the support growing up, or did you get a coach or a mentor or someone that was, that support system or cheerleader, whatever you want to consider it, kind of saying, hey, we can do this, you can do this?
My father taught me integrity. My mother taught me possibility. There's been dozens of mentors and people who didn't know that they were being that for me, but became it. And as I've moved through my life, I've sucked the marrow out of every opportunity I could, every human being I could bump into, to study them, to learn from them, to, evolve within their scope. I learned early on that the only opinion that mattered was mine. And even though my parents provided me a great foundation, it wasn't until I let go of the racism of my father and the short-sightedness of my mother and allowed myself to become me that things became possible. Yeah, that's probably most of it. I think back, and over, 70 years of my existence, there's been hundreds of people who offered me a tidbit here and even didn't know they were doing it. Like when the one guy said, no, you're an arrogant asshole, I'm firing you now, was maybe one of the most influential moments in my life for me to recognize that, when you're 18 years old, you probably shouldn't tell the owner of the company how to run his business. You have to wait till you're 30 or 40 years old, and then you can come back.
Yeah, that's a good point. Even when I was 18 and 19, I got into some business trouble too, and it was the weirdest business trouble that I'm not sure if people can relate. Where I was part of a business finance program. I was doing an internship, and they assign you mentors that are going through a certain program to be hired with the company. And so I had met with the mentor the first year, and we're just having conversations about college and everything. And it was a young girl. She was probably 20, 25, maybe a little bit less, 24. And I was 18 at the time. And so apparently I scared her. I scared her with my ambitions, with all the college that I wanted to do and my vision for the future. Well, she goes on and she tells the rep that she was so afraid of me that she didn't want to mentor me anymore. And then so I had a whole meeting with my supervisor at the time, and he couldn't believe it. He was like, "What?" And then I had a meeting with the intern coordinator. She was for lack of better words, a feminist. So of course she's going to support her girl. And so I was the victim. I was the bad guy there. And I was like, this is very interesting. And he's just like, leave it alone, like my supervisor. But I learned something really powerful that day. It's like, you can't be yourself around people when you have a very potent personality. So what do you do instead? I said, I'm just going to find people who can handle it. And that's what I did. So I made sure I'm not going to surround myself with weak-minded individuals and like people who can't take constructive criticism or people who can't handle the heat. There's the saying, if you can't take the heat, get out of the kitchen. And that saying, I don't know if it's good or bad. What is your interpretation on that saying? Whereas the fire can be so hot, do you escape or do you embrace it?
I probably embrace it. I've prided myself on never running away from anything. I got an education when I went to sell computerized fire detection systems to large lumber mills like Weyerhaeuser and stuff like that. And I showed up in what I would consider business casual, khakis and a button down. And the guard at the gate stopped me and he said, "Who are you going to meet?" And I told him it was, the head of the mill. And he said, "Yeah, no." I said, "What?" He said, "Yeah, no, you need to go into town. Here's the store you go to. You need to get yourself some jeans. You need to get yourself a pair of boots and a flannel." And he said, "And don't come back until you're dressed like that. Otherwise, he won't even speak to you."
Mm.
And so I did. I came back now with fresh new jeans and a brand new flannel and boots. But hey, at least it was the correct look. And then I understood very quickly that even though I had a fairly substantial vocabulary, that none of that was going to be useful. And that if I didn't salt expletives in fairly consistently, this guy wasn't going to hear a word I said. So I learned right away to chameleon myself into almost any situation so that I could be heard. And as soon as the communication got established, then I could do something with it. Then I could move it in a direction. I could complete the sale. I could influence their belief structure, those kinds of things. But first, I had to meet them where they were, even if they were running around with their hair on fire.
Mm-hmm. It's so true, even though it's kind of, I know some people might be saying, why do I have to change for someone else? Like that's probably the idea that is going on in some of the audience members' mind. Like, why do I have to change my clothing for someone? Why can't they accept me? And again, it's a very modern mindset of all the DEI and all the BS going on. People are going to have this idea of you should just accept me for who I am. But people they enjoy. Like people who do business with me, they don't do business with me because, they like the company so much. They like me, like
that's right.
They look at my personality like, hey, Mike, I like you. You're a good guy. I don't mind talking to you about anything. I don't mind being in my circle and telling people about you, because if someone didn't like you, they wouldn't want to be around you. But yet in our world today, how many people do you know are around people they don't like? They go to 9-to-5 jobs. They're stuck in cubicles and they're
all
literally
the time.
And they're literally suffering. Why do people go down this road and they live in this rat race essentially of life?
Yep. It's It is interesting, and I agree with you. It's certainly a cultural evolution that is taking place, has taken place. It's always evolving. There was never a question when I started out. When I was 18 years old, there was not a question that I didn't do whatever it took to connect with my audience. It's just how you did it. And over time, I don't know if it's a sense of entitlement. I don't know. It's social media society or whatever it is, but no, you got to take me for how I am. Well, I agree. We should all accept everybody for how they are. But I'm a gay male, and I had to define that for people before I could make them deal with me as a gay male. And I took it up as a cause, that's when I was busy trying to save the world. And I would be in your face about it because you needed to know me that way first before you could accept me as that. And I learned that it didn't have to be the item that defined my existence, that it was just a characteristic of me. And people would accept it or reject it. And none of that had anything to do with me. So I stepped through that. I got past that need, but it was important to identify and then demolish. And I've just found that to be the case every step of the way. And I think, I'm all in favor of DEI. I think that everyone should embrace, and I work with a lot of companies, the diversity, equity, and inclusion. Sure. I mean, is there another way to be in the world? And clearly there is. We're watching that happen. What Google announced just the other day, that they're rejecting DEI in their hiring practices because they're a federal contractor. And clearly our federal government right now is not necessarily a big proponent. But that's okay. It doesn't mean that the effect isn't the same. It doesn't mean that you still consider who you hire based on their capacities and capabilities and I don't know, it's not quite a blind eye, but you don't let cultural characterizations determine your decisions. You really look towards skill sets and capabilities.
I think the big problem is if they look at a certain person, they automatically go in with a prejudice, and the prejudice is not necessarily bad. For example, a prejudice for someone who has maybe like an Indian background, they're really good in IT. Right. That's a prejudice, is me making an assumption. So if they look for a job in, let's say digital design, I'm going to say, I'm probably going to find someone who, went to an art school that might be Caucasian or something like that. Right. So I might just say, this is what my preference is, but that has no validity when it comes to the skill that person can demonstrate. So I love to say, hey, like, what can you do? Right. Like, where are you good? Like, where can you excel versus, your background, your culture, your color, and all of these things, I think are, become the entitlement that you talk to, especially in the Black community. Like, oh my goodness, like there's some people just so entitled and they don't have the background to be entitled. One of the things is interesting is the dating scene in the Black community, where they talk about, like a Black woman and a Black male or something like that. They'll say, okay, well, let's figure out what this relationship's going to bring, right? So the guy might say, okay, well, I'll pay for your nails and your hair and your cars and everything. But she might say, well, I don't want the car you're going to get me. I don't want a Toyota. I want a BMW or something. So she's trying to go a step above it. Maybe it's more than what he wants to do, or his, more than his lifestyle. And then I just asked the question, what warrants that entitlement? What warrants a person's self-worth? Because I had a mentor. He was a manager at GM, and he was a big honcho. He worked with the whole Mexican infrastructure, making sure parts were coming, things like that. Cars were being built. Big guy, right? And him and I had lunch one day, and he says, Mike, what are you worth? And I was like, I don't know. I gave him the answer. I was priceless, but it was because I never thought about the question. And like, I never thought about how much I was worth. He's like, well, I know how much I'm worth an hour. Yeah. I know how much I'm worth a year.
Yep.
If someone wants to hire me for a consultant, I know what I'm going to charge them. And this is early on, like 2017 or something like that,
Okay.
2018, right? Like right before like the business there. And I was like, whoa, this was powerful because I never thought about this idea. What was my worth? How can a person identify their worth is my question to you.
I think it has a little bit to do with how arrogant you're willing to be.
Mm-hmm.
And I think everyone should be a little more arrogant than they're comfortable with. And then there is a consideration for what the market will bear. When I was working with Chinese multinational companies, I got demanded of me to increase my hours. At the time, I was working with Price Waterhouse back when there was a Price Waterhouse. And I quoted a job that I was going into collaboration with them. And they came back to me and said, yeah, we won't be able to use you. I'm going, okay, but why? I said, well, you don't charge enough. I said, okay. She said, well, look, we're over here charging this. You're over here charging that. It makes us look like we're either just ripping them off or you're worthless. So you need to come up. And so I did. I actually tripled my hourly rate to be consistent with them and learned something very quickly, that my value had more to do with perception than it did some mathematical equation that said, okay, put these figures in here and you'll come out with a number on this end. So I learned that, well, it's like the more you pay, is a Bentley worth so much more than the Toyota? You can make a case for it, right? It's got a well-built engine, it's got nice finishings and all that kind of stuff, but is it worth that much more than the Toyota? And the same thing's true of humans. Chinese multinational, I was working with a company that supplied like 4% of the Chinese GDP, and they came to me and asked me what my hourly rate was to convert a bunch of their MBAs into human beings. And I said, well, I charge $9.80 an hour. They said, okay, great. Can you take on the first 17 and we'll see how that goes? No balk, no anything. And my hourly rate now is $300 an hour. But that's because the market I want to work in can manage that. Am I worth 300? Sure. Am I worth $1,000? Sure. I don't care. Am I worth more than that? Sure. And I value build in certain situations where I've probably gotten paid several $1,000s an hour for what I've done. But the value of me, quite frankly, is in the difference I make for the people I work with. I would do this for free if there wasn't a karmic imbalance in that, and if it didn't cause them to be unmotivated to accomplish what they came for.
Mm-hmm. 100%.
Yeah. I get everything I need out of seeing them evolve, seeing them move through their spaces. That's all I need for the rest of my life, and I'm good. And it's just a horrible thing to do to them, so I will never do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's this idea of skin in the game where they're just talking about you have to invest what you think is your growth. So if you want to learn a language, for example, and let's say you get Duolingo and you get the free version, you're not going to learn a language.
Nope.
But if you get the paid version, you're more likely to follow through. If you get a coach, if you get a coach at, on December 31st and you say, I'm going to keep this coach for the rest of the year, you're going to be in a better place than if you said, okay, I'm going to do this by myself and I'm going to try to save some money. It's very similar to how if you want to save some money with drywalling your home or fixing your own car and changing your own oil, how much time do you lose trying to figure things out? And this is something that I learned probably like year 2 into business. I was like, why in the world am I learning all of these things that I don't even necessarily need? Let me hire someone who can do it better than me and just say, let me do what I love. Yes. So when it came to like website design and stuff, like I can do it, right? Yeah. I know how to go in, I can change some stuff and some words. But when it comes to code, I'm the wrong person to talk to, right? I have a website guy who does that. And I easily could have said, you know what? I'm going to spend all this time, all of these resources to learn something that would just be a minute fraction of the business. And I say, well, what is the thing that I love and the things that need my hand the most? And I think many people are, they get distracted in doing all the busy work. They have to do this, they have to do that. How can people start to focus on the things that matter to them most rather than everything else in our busy world that can distract them?
It's easy, I think, to do what you described. But when you're first starting out or early phases of any business, it feels like you can't afford anything and you've got to do everything. That's probably the time you want to do less of that rather than more. There are avenues available now that never were when I was starting my first companies. You can go on Fiverr and find somebody who'll do just about any technical challenge you want for pennies on the dollar. And if the thing that I have my clients look at is, okay, what do you charge? What do you make? And would you be willing to pay someone that amount of money to do this trivial task? And if the answer is no, then find somebody who will for less money than you charge and have them do it. Yeah, it'll take a little bit of input, there's a little bit of guidance, but it's going to take huge amounts of time off of your table and get something accomplished and leg you up. So just like you say, the time you invest is billable time at your rate that will easy pay for the person, who's doing the technical task.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, if I'm not willing to pay someone $300 an hour to do the thing, then I'm not going to do it.
Mm-hmm. Very good point. I like to also give people resources. Resources are things that people can implement, they can utilize, tools for the toolbox, if you would. For example, I have blogs, we have the podcast here where people can learn about things that, are going to give them an edge. And I always ask people like, what is your favorite book and things along those lines. And it's always different, when it comes to the books. And so I basically just brought in the question to what resources would you recommend to individuals? It could be your own personal resources that you have, maybe a blog, websites, YouTube, et cetera.
Yep.
Or it's something that maybe, woke you up or they, gave you inspiration or gave you some insight that was so beneficial that you share it with everyone you meet.
Like you say, there's no single book, right? There's thousands of books. My favorite book is the one I'm almost done writing. I'm in my final edit on it and it'll be coming out very shortly. So that would be my favorite resource that way. And probably the reason I wrote it was to provide that access to what it is I give my clients in a written form so that anybody can go out there and spend their $15 on it and get it or whatever. But I think the greatest tool that I ever used was studying humans. I think we all have our heroes. So I sought out and studied the people who personified not who I wanted to be, but the character traits that I wanted to model. Nelson Mandela is the first one that comes to mind. And, there's a handful of other folks that fit in that. But his demonstration of ridiculous levels of integrity and patience and who he was through his entire life was just, I think, a model for any human being on the planet. So I've collected those people, and I'm very particular about which ones I've collected and which pieces I take away from each of them. But, I'm a coach. So, my resource is human beings. So that's what I use more than anything else. And I've read everything I could get my hands on for the longest time. Now I've stopped reading other people's opinions of how to be in the world because I've spent a lifetime determining how I be in the world. And I don't need someone else to help me figure that out anymore. That's a younger man's job. I know who I am. I know who I have designed myself to become. And I know that from that breadth of experience that I can provide something for any human being on the planet and just pull from the bits and pieces that I can bring to the table.
Yeah. It's a different situation for everyone, because my situation could be different than your situation versus the person that's my next door neighbor. They can have a very different view on the world. Perception plays so many roles. And talked about perception a couple episodes ago, where I had a guest talk about perception in a different way. Perception was a brand to them. And I said, okay, that's a unique way of looking at perception. And then perception for me, when I was talking about it, was, it's how you view a person, a situation, the world, whatever. And just because you view it that way doesn't mean everyone else is going to view it that way. And what I have found was, like, when you're trying to find your purpose or your why in life, you have to get very clear on what you see and then what you would like to continue to see. It's that simple. Because if you are seeing the world for all the hardship and all the problems and you're doing nothing about it, did you want to keep seeing that, or did you want to be a part of it? And then people who chase the corporate ladders and they go after, a lot of money, there's nothing wrong with that. But those individuals around 35, 45 years old, they realize that family is important. They realize that, they want fulfillment rather than, a pocket full of money. They would spend all the money to get their health back. They'll spend all the money to find all the love.
Yep.
And so their values shift. What would be the correct way for a person to identify their values when they're younger, that it would transition all the way into later years in life? So it's not going to be a value today is different than a value tomorrow.
Sure. To rewind just a little bit to the point you made earlier, the perception thing, not only will everybody else have a different perception, I guarantee everyone has a different perception. And their perception of me or events or circumstances or whatever is not particularly relevant. It's one of the very first and one of the most core things I deal with my clients is, look, you're making it all up. So make it up in the most powerful way you can possibly make it up, because you're making it up. So when someone tells you, oh, you can't do that, it's like, okay, thanks for sharing. I'll go out and do it now. But it's only what happens inside of me that matters. Everything that's outside of me is just somebody else's stuff. And their stuff comes from 10-year-old trauma and, bumping into something, or the most recent bad interaction they had with their mate, or whatever it is. And that's how they're filtering everything that's coming away from me. So the very first tool I provide a client is, okay, shed all of that, get rid of all that. It's all made up. It's somebody else's making it up for you. Well, reject that out of hand. It's just not useful. And as long as you understand you're making it up, make it up in the most powerful way you possibly can. Now that I've completely strayed away from your question, could you restate your question?
Well, I think it was part of the whole conversation. It's not so much only questions. I don't
Gotcha.
It's so weird when people come on the podcast and they're like, you're going to ask me a bunch of questions. I'm like, I understand this is an interview, but this is a conversation before anything.
Absolutely.
Like I was on a podcast once, and that's why I don't do guest podcasts really. A person had 25 questions. He gave me the questions all before the podcast, and he literally just hit me with the questions. I'm like, this is like I could have just recorded this and you could have just put it together yourself. So I just love conversations. I think people appreciate that more than if, like Joe Rogan, he doesn't just come in with a bunch of like a list of questions. Yeah, he has a couple of things he wants to ask you, but it's like a conversation. He talks about monkeys or something, something ridiculous. So, going back to what you said, the question is values, how we can have values that are good to, withstand the test of time, from being young to being older.
I think, and this is work I do with clients when they're looking for their purpose. First thing I do is disavow them that there is one they must discover. I've been asked so many times, what's the meaning of life? And so I answer it. So there is no meaning to life. Life
I love it.
No meaning. There's nothing built in. You don't come here and there's a book and you follow it and you end up somewhere, because that's what life is about. Life has no meaning. So that leaves a vacuum that needs to be filled. So then the choice is, okay, what are you going to have your life mean? And as long as you don't have a whole bunch of reasons why, like, oh, this one sounds good, so I'll do that. Or, yeah, the world's broken, so I'm going to fix it. Or any of those things I used to believe. Come to it, and this is my purpose, because this is my purpose, not for any other reason. Then nobody can mess with that. Nobody can undo that or find, oh, well, what if in this scenario, this wasn't the case, then you don't have a purpose anymore. Well, oops. So if I was talking to a younger person and they were looking to establish values that would stand the test of time, it would be, okay, look underneath whatever it is. Even with me back in, when I was 18 years old and out to save the world, okay, so if someone had asked me, why do you want to save the world? Well, I don't know. It just needs saving. So there's something underneath that, right? First of all, the world doesn't need saving. It's doing fine. It's continuing on, but there was something driving me, and I certainly felt driven, but was really unclear as to what that was. So I would keep peeling the onion layers back until I got to the core of, okay, this is the one that lets me sleep at night, or this is the one that makes me get up every morning. Whatever it is, there's something underneath. It's a core structure that when you cook everything down to its very base level, it's there no matter what. And hang on to that, have it be the true course as you move through your existence, and always bring yourself back toward that center. And then any choices you make, it's like, okay, does this move that forward? Does it not move this forward? If it moves it forward, do it. If it doesn't move that forward, don't do it.
Yeah, it's powerful when we can look at our values and we can do the work before we just kind of say, this is what I think I want. Because when we go down this path, we're going to be having so many turns and stop gaps, and you're going to just get to the point where it's like, okay, enough's enough. And some people, they stop and they quit and they don't get back up. Some people, they find comfort and they say, this is comfort. This is my circumstance. This is where I'm going to be for the rest of my life. Maybe they get a little bit further than their parents, but then, what does that mean? So like, are they living in a trailer and now you're living in an apartment or something like that? So it's like, yeah, sure, you're making progress, but like, is that truly what you wanted for your life? Did you want it to be an apartment? Maybe you wanted your own farm or something. I love the idea of having a farm and just maybe having some goats and some chickens and, taking out coyotes that are trying to, get your eggs and stuff.
Yes.
And your goats and stuff.
Yeah.
That sounds enjoyable to me. But, that life is very different than someone who wants to live in Dubai and go out and party and drive Ferraris and things like that. Success is very different for each individual. And so my last question to you is about success. How would a person define success?
Again, I think it's the same thing as life purpose. You define your own success however you define your own success. And that almost sounds cop-out-ish. Success used to mean a big house and lots of money to me. So I built a 16,000 square foot house and I was making, I don't know, a couple of $1 million a year. And so I was successful, miserable, but successful. And so then I got a divorce, sold the house, and completely shifted my life, became measurably happier, and lost all the trappings of success. Success for me and my definition now is how many people have I and do I continue to influence and provide something so they can, for themselves, create a better existence by their own definitions. So I think it's, again, the same thing. When you peel it back, okay, what's your measure of success? Now, if it's a lot of money, there's nothing wrong with that. Go get it, and I'll show you how. If it's amazing relationships, great, I'll show you how. Whatever it is, some combination of those things, super, wonderful. If it's living in a commune and communing, 18 hours a day with whatever your spiritual structure is, great, do that. But define it for yourself without the trappings of societal expectations, your parents or other people's influences. Make choices for yourself that feed your soul. There's nothing else to do here except that.
The conversation we had today was definitely one of a real conversation, I believe, and it's a different conversation, I'm sure, from what we have here on Coaching in Session, because we have young professionals come on. Typically, we have people who are in their 30s and 40s, and have a man as seasoned as yourself come on. it was, it behooved me to ask these types of questions about
Totally.
being young and being on that journey of life, because no matter where you are, 30, 40, 50, you can look back, 10, 20, 30 years, whatever, and say, I was that person and I never healed. I never adjusted. I never shifted. And today can be that opportunity for you to, give some insight to it and say, you know what, today can be that change. And so I would love for you to tell the audience where they can find you. So if they want to continue the conversation or reach out or to, see how they can, get on your calendar and see if they can have a conversation with you.
Yes, I love that. It is specifically a shift that I'm making. I have come to the recent realization that interacting with the younger set, the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s. I love that I can say 50s or younger now. But interacting with those folks is a new direction that I want to face because I think it brings something pretty unique to that conversation. The easiest way to reach me is at my website, dalekershner.com. And on there's a Calendly thing where they can go in there and they can book a 30-minute free call with me and no strings attached. I'm perfectly happy to spend 30 minutes that I know will rock their world, I promise. And if it results in something great, then there was something for them to get. If it doesn't, great, then they got something. So that's the easiest way to reach out to me is at that website. Book 30 minutes into my calendar and let's get on the phone.
Perfect. And if you're ready for your world to get rocked or ready for you to rock your world, check out Dale. All the links are going to be in the description box below. So I encourage everyone to reach out to him. Dale and I had a wonderful conversation today talking about some of his work, his experience. And this is what you should be looking for when you're looking for a coach. You should be looking for someone who's real, someone who has been through the gauntlet, but then is not afraid to say, hey, I'm human too. And, being a human has so many facets to it. And it's the ups and downs that make life beautiful. And, our conversation today, Dale, was beautiful. It was eye-opening. It was going to be invigorating. And it's going to be inspirational for so many individuals today. So I do want to thank you for coming on, spending some time and just talking about your work in general.
Totally my pleasure. I appreciate the opportunity.